Hi guys, welcome to the video. I'm Media Mark and cheers for coming to the channel. Here we do movie and TV show news, reviews, breakdowns and theories. Today's video is going to cover my theory of what it would be like if America in the Harry Potter wizarding world had a second amendment for the unforgivable curse, Avada Kedavra.
Avada Kedavra!
What would life be like? What would the parallels be with the Muggle world? And how would the rest of the wizarding world feel about this? Let's get down and dirty and take a look-see. Part 1. History of Magic in the U.S.A. Eventually, we'll explore a hypothetical situation in which the killing curse would be a legal right in the United States of Wizarderica, or more officially, the Magical Congress of the United States of America, also known as MACUSA. To do this, we'll have to take a little dive into the history of magic in the United States. Between the 14th and 17th century in the wizarding world, magical folk in the Americas and Europe knew about each other and had contact long prior to Muggle discovery of the region. They were aware of each other's customs, and both knew of the concept of non-magical and magical families. In the Native American communities, magic users were sometimes shunned because of the belief that they were possessed by malevolent spirits. Others were lauded as great healers and hunters within their communities. The Native American magic users differed greatly from their European counterparts, as they never used wands, instead just summoning the magic from within themselves. They were skilled animagi, hence the legends of shapeshifters and skinwalkers in Muggle folklore. Fast forward to the 17th century. By this stage, European wizards and witches were emigrating to the US, similarly to the Muggles of that period. They went there to find a better life away from persecution of Muggles or the authorities of the time. Some hid within Native American magical communities, where they were welcomed with open arms, where others began with their own communities, hidden amongst the Muggles. Life was tough in America initially for these magic users, as there was very little infrastructure in the wizarding world in the way of apothecaries, wand makers, and even education at the time was limited, as the now prestigious school of Ilvermorny was just a shack with 2 students and 2 teachers back then. The MACUSA had not been invented back at this stage, and the magical community was divided and hidden from the non-magical one. This left a massive power vacuum, leading to the rise of the Scourers. The Scourers were a band of newly arrived international wizarding mercenaries that were committed to hunting down criminals and anyone else that would get them gold. They answered to no one and delighted in torture and holding authority over this Wild West-like state. They were known to turn on their own magical kind, trafficking and turning over wizards and witches to non-magic users for extermination in exchange for gold. These Scourers grew to prominence in the late 17th century, and their taste for violence and brutality only grew towards Muggles and magical folk alike. This, along with the Salem witch trials between 1692 and 1693, was a big turning point in the history of magic of North America. After these tragic trials were carried out that affected Muggles and magical people alike, wizards and witches left the USA in droves, with immigration rates being lowered until at least the early 20th century. This led to a much higher rate of magical people born into Muggle families than in other regions, interestingly leading to less prejudice in the Americas for magical blood purity compared to that of Europe. Scourers and non-mages ran rife at this period of time, and the magical community had to respond. This led to the creation of the nowadays powerful Magical Congress of the United States of America, MACUSA. The MACUSA was the magical community coming together to make a set of laws and regulations for themselves to live by, and keep some harmony within their community. Their first mission was to hunt down the Scourers and punish them for their treachery against the wizarding world. Interestingly enough, the punishment was execution, a method favoured by the American wizarding world justice system to this day. This is in contrast to the UK, where they would send you to Azkaban to rot and be watched over by the horrifying Dementors. All of this led the Scourers into hiding within the Muggle community, where they would favour their Muggle children and instill within them from an early age a philosophy of hatred towards the magical community. These families would pass down their knowledge of the existence of the wizarding world and their hatred of it down throughout generations to come. Things remained tense between the non-magical and magical community after the Salem witch trials, which led the MACUSA wanting to distance the communities from each other. In 1790, a government official's daughter revealed the wizarding world to a no-mage named Bartholomew Barebone, with whom she was infatuated with. Unfortunately, Barty Boy was the descendant of a Scourer, and with this knowledge, took an armed mob of fellow thinkers on a purge of wizards and witches. During all of this, he mistakenly shot a fellow Muggle who he thought was a witch in his efforts to expose the magical community of America. The Muggle police arrested him, and many people needed to be obliviated. but this shook the wizarding people of America nonetheless. Due to all of this, the MACUSA brought in Rappaport's Law, named after Emily Rappaport, then president. The law dictated that no wizard or witch could befriend, love, or associate with beyond necessary any no-mage. It was in place to ensure the secrecy and security of the wizarding community within the USA. Fast forwarding a little further to round off the facts before we get into my theory, we can take a quick look at the 1920s. The magic community in this era had taken part in World War I, but the segregation between them and the non-magic community was never higher. The Rappaport Law was still going strong and the magic community remained hidden. Interestingly, the wizard community allowed the consumption of booze, unlike the Muggle community of the time, who were under prohibition. The main point that I will highlight here is that the government of the time required wizards and witches to carry wand permits at all times, which we will discuss in relation to my theory later in part 2 of the video. Speaking of which, let's get into the theory. Part 2. The Amendment Theory. So let me tell you now where my theory proposes what I will call the 13th Amendment to the Wizarding Constitution, if there is one. And I'll call it that just to make it more witchy. The 13th Amendment being the right for all wizards and witches to use lethal spells if necessary, to defend against future witch hunts or against dark witches or wizards. I argue that the Imperius Curse and Cruciatus Curse would remain illegal as their sole purposes are human possession and torture respectively, and these two things are clear-cut, morally objectable. Anyway, let's get into it. My theory is that this law exists in the wizarding world, and has done so ever since shortly after the Rappaport Law came into effect. Here is how I think it went down. Witches and wizards were rocked by a witch hunt and the subsequent murder of a no-mage after the wizarding world had only briefly been revealed, and they wanted to find a way to protect themselves in case they were the next victim. This caused them to push for the right to use the unforgivable curse of Avada Kedavra to protect themselves, and they wanted this written into their constitution. All over the various states of America, wizards and witches protested in the streets, firing the killing curse into the sky, demanding that the amendment be passed. Rappaport at this stage was a supporter of the bill, but faced some opposition from government officials who were worried of future riots or wars. Due to overwhelming popular support, the bill passed in 1795, to the great satisfaction of the wizarding public. This shaped the culture of North America for the centuries to come. If we now revisit 1920s America, I want to bring up the point about the necessity of having your wand license present at all times. Now, I theorize that over the century and a quarter that had passed since the 13th Amendment, some problems had arisen. As with cases in real life now, there were many incidents where the lines were blurry on whether the killing curse had been used in self-defense or with malice. This caused MACUSA to implement a wand license, where they could track the spells being used by citizens in case they ever needed to investigate a crime. We see something similar to this in the Goblet of Fire book, where Mr. Diggory checks a wand found in the possession of Winky to see which spell it previously cast using the spell Prior Incantato. In this case, it reveals that the last spell cast was the Dark Mark. Anyway, fast forward to this century. What theoretically could have happened with this law being in place for the American magical community? I imagine, for instance, that if it did exist, in this day and age there would be conspiracy theorists who, like Bartholomew, would want to expose the wizarding world. They could even be descendants of Scourers, and be aware of the world throughout tales taught by their forefathers. This would potentially lead to wizards acting out in self-defense when confronted by such people, or splinter cell communities of wizards forming against muggles, with the intention of murdering them as a preemptive strike in a dog-eat-dog world. In this regard, a big difference between US and UK wizarding culture would be that some disputes would no doubt be ending with murder in the USA, because within the Constitution you could always argue that the person cursed was a dark witch or wizard, and that they were a scare out to get you. In the UK, the curses are by name and nature unforgivable, so I believe there's probably no context for using them legally within the story. The American system no doubt could create a lot of problems and some problematic court cases within the MACUSA. Law enforcement in the US would be a lot more gung-ho, not at all like real life.
Maybe not.
As their job would be to pursue dark wizards, a lot more of them would probably have dead or alive bounties, rather than having them being brought back for interrogation or imprisonment. People would possibly be killed in non-life or death situations, more commonly than countries that did not allow their auras and law enforcement to use lethal force. Arguably, this would be better than having your soul sucked out by a nightmarish depression monster as practiced by the British Ministry of Magic. I think that the main difference between real life and this scenario is that everyone in the wizarding world has a wand, which essentially is a gun for all intents and purposes, if used that way. So therefore, people in the UK, where it is illegal to use this unforgivable curse, are simply choosing not to break the law, whereas in real life, people in the UK typically don't have access to the means to shoot somebody in the real world. Anyway, that's about everything that I can think of for this theory video. Let me know what you think the differences would be in the comments section and anything that I might have missed. If you have lasted to the end, thank you very much, as this is my first video on this channel, and if you could leave a like and subscribe, that would make my day. Cheers guys, thank you very much, and until next time, have a good one.